Before you make your big announcement,
Just the idea that they're trying to
Okay,
get.
we'll get through the slides first. Okay, this is the title.
We're gonna have to talk real loud because we have a goofy air
Okay.
system over here that makes a lot of racket.
Okay, this is the title slide. It speaks for itself. And it's what I think is the vitality behind the whole research that I've been doing for the last 3 years. I've been speaking all over the country. I was in Colorado in September and gave a presentation before representatives from over 60 countries at the 4th World Wilderness Congress delegation. And I drafted a resolution out there that you've all got a copy of. And they did unanimously adopt that resolution. I've also sent the resolution to the California State Legislature, and that's before their legislature right now, and I've been assured that that's going to pass without trouble. And we're doing the same thing in Wisconsin. It'll be going up before the Wisconsin legislature as well. But before we can get this thing through, those of you that support my idea to definitely hear about it, it does have to start at the county level. That's the basic political entity that first has to endorse it before it goes any farther up the line. Okay, the site that I now own actually contains the home site of the Muir family. The buildings were situated on the 17.11 acres that I now own. So I can make that a National Historic Site without anybody else endorsing it. But I think that Marquette County really stands to benefit by National Historic Site status or National Park Service affiliated area status. We can discuss that. There's 2 different routes that we can go. Okay. When the Muirs first arrived in Pioneer Marquette County, they came from Ellis Island, New York by steamer to Milwaukee. And then at Milwaukee, they came across the prairies, virgin prairies that look like this, all kinds of nice prairie flowers, grasses. And they came to Kingston, as many of you know, and stayed at the Kingston Inn a couple nights, and Alexander Gray took them out and they found the Fountain Lake Farm site. And this is something what it would have looked like back in the spring of 1849. This is what they first saw. This is Ennis Lake now. They called it Fountain Lake because of the bubbling springs in the meadow which is the source of the lake. There's about 25 or 30 springs in the state scientific area. It's a designated state scientific area that's just below where I live. And this is the main spring that feeds the lake. And John Muir credited this site, this sedge meadow, as being the place where he first conceived the idea of the national park system. He first got the idea for preserving lands just for their own beauty, for the sake of their flowers, the birds. It all happened right here in Marquette County. Too often, John Muir is associated with the mountains of Alaska and California and so on. But really, his most valuable lessons in terms of interpreting nature and understanding nature happened right here in Marquette County when he was a boy. And this is that famous meadow here. Again, the spring. The meadow is pretty much in the same shape it was when the Muirs lived there. Like all wet communities, plant communities, they tend to become drier through time. So it's perhaps drier than it was back in the 1840s and 50s and 60s, but it's still a beautiful example of a pristine sedge meadow. This is a sketch that John Muir made of that meadow, and as you can see at the bottom, he's got sketched from the roof of the Bur Oak shanty. This is actually one page out of the childhood autobiography that he wrote in 1913, less than a year before he died, called The Story of My Boyhood and Youth, where he recalled all his experiences in Marquette County. And he was such an articulate sketcher that this sketch became very important when I was going to place the site on the National Register of Historic Places. The Park Service asked for, when the buildings are no longer there, in the absence of the buildings, you've got to document exactly where they sat. It took me about 2 years to do that. There was a lot of confusion as to exactly where the buildings were. Okay, I hope we can read these text slides. Can everybody read that okay? Here's Muir then, out of the story of my boyhood and youth, talking about his impressions of that meadow at Fountain Lake Farm. Okay, this is the section where I want to talk a little bit about my documentation of exactly where the buildings were. And buildings disappear like native components of the landscape, in this case a bird, a passenger pigeon, which was so common in Marquette County when the Muirs were here that it would blacken the sky, block out the sun. And just by sheer weight of the number of birds, it would snap off the largest limbs on bur oak trees out on the savannas. This speaks for itself. When the Muirs first arrived then, they put up a hut like this, a little shanty that took them a couple days to construct. They lived in this, the bur oak shanty it's known as, throughout the first summer and part of that fall of 1849, while they were building the more substantial framed farmhouse. Okay, this is, we're not being able to... The top picture here is an actual photo from 1863 of the sketch that we're looking at. It's just below it there. And it shows the farmhouse that was once there at the farm. I put the two on the same slide because it also shows us how accurate Muir was when he sketched things. So that builds a case in terms of using his sketches for documenting other things down the line. The farmhouse sat there. Those are silver maple trees that were planted around the house, and it burned shortly after the turn of the century, this century. Okay, and then getting to when I finally did take it upon myself to find out where the buildings were. This is a photo taken from Linnie Marsh Wolf's Pulitzer Prize-winning autobiography of Muir called Son of the Wilderness. Shows a man, a local man, pointing, maybe even some of you recognize him, it's hard, he's pretty dark on this photo, pointing over to where, by popular belief, they thought the Muir farm stood. This is a page that's out of Trail of the Serpent, a book that was published in 1973, and it shows the John Muir homestead there. And as it turns out, that house is actually the Hugh McGlynn house. It was located just northeast of the granite marker in Muir Memorial Park. That one has been documented beyond any argument. Fred Holmes wrote about it, the quote on top, in Alluring Wisconsin, a book that was published in 1924, that we came upon an old, unpainted, weather-beaten, deserted farmhouse that was fast falling into ruin. Behind it was the glistening lake. Now, a lot of the techniques I used in determining which house was which and where it sat was based on all kinds of things, old aerial photos, actual photos in California that are in the Bancroft Library at Berkeley, interviews with people like Harry Kearns, Ben Hull, who's since passed away. Ben was really a gold mine for me. He had a real good recollection, especially of this house. That was necessary again to document beyond any doubt exactly what house was what and where these buildings sat, including the barn, stable, chicken coop, on and on. This is a house, excuse me, house, it's a wing, it's a granary on the Bessie Eggleston farm that was believed to come off of the Muir house, and as it turns out, it didn't. That was never a part of the Muir house. Architecturally, we eliminated that. Actually, between these lilacs that are blooming at the Muir farm is where the bur oak shanty sat. The lilacs were set out. They were planted in the spring of 1849, shortly after the Muirs arrived, by Sarah Muir, the oldest of the Muir children, who later married David Galloway, and they started farming the Fountain Lake farm after the Muirs moved over to Hickory Hill. It was very common of immigrants, no doubt some of your ancestors did the same thing, to bring over lilacs from the old country, and as soon as the ground was thawed enough, they would set them out, usually on the corner of their initial log cabin. And that was what happened here with the shanty. This is a photo from the State Historical Society Iconographic Archives, dated 1927, I believe. It shows David Owens poking with a stick in the old Muir cellar depression. This is what was left of it after the house burned. Now, to someone like me that's researches landscape history, this photo is very valuable too, because you can start lining up different landscape features. I can take a surveyor's transit out on the land. I can line things up, that are the same today, fixed landscape features like the knoll, maybe a meander and a brook, something that hasn't changed over time. And you can tell where something had to be, where that photo had to be taken from. Okay, so I started, as my studies went on, Harry Kearns, Ben Hull related to me that they had heard that Archie Schmitz had indeed dug out the old Muir cellar depression and built a house in 1946 or 7 on the old cellar depression. When I first heard that story, I couldn't believe it. I dismissed it, didn't take it seriously, and it took me a while to really begin to believe that that was the case. I started having regular meetings with Irv Schmitz, Archie's son. Irv was a real help to me. He provided the old photos. This is one that we're looking at, and this shows the site. Now, the silver maples that you see, the big trees that are around the house, were deliberately planted for shade, and I can date those back to the 1850s. Okay, based on aerial photos, I've got aerial photos that go back to the first ones, mid-1930s, when aerial photography started at a popular scale. And the trees actually at that time were larger than they are today. In other words, limbs have been taken off because they've died. But they are indeed, I've taken core borings, samplings, I've had many foresters' opinions on it, and the trees do date back to that time. I've got photos that show the trees sitting out in front of the Fountain Lake farmhouse when they were just little whips, little saplings that the Muirs set out. So indeed, everything started leaning towards the Schmidt site as being the place where the Muir house actually stood, which was not popular by local belief. And this is another photo showing the house up close. You can see the size of the one maple there. All the maples are still living, except for one that was cut down a few years ago. Today, this is what the site looks like for the most part. This shows the house after I bought it. It's got white aluminum siding on it and so on. We have right now 4 Amish carpenters working on restoring the house so that it looks something like, when it's done, something like the period Muir farmhouse. So the aluminum's been ripped off. It's being restored back to wood, old-fashioned beveled siding, wood shingles. It's going to restore the character of the original Muir farmhouse. Pretty close. Okay, we can't see this again, the whole thing, but this is a resolution that was unanimously adopted by the Marquette County Board in the summer of 1986, just giving me permission to go ahead and put this site and the Hickory Hill Farm site on the National Register of Historic Places. This is an aerial view taken in the mid-50s of the Fountain Lake area, or Ennis Lake, I think I should say. It shows the basic land patterns. Now, since I bought it a year ago, the first thing I did this spring was, because I am a landscape architect, I'm very interested in early landscapes, restoring them back to a pre-settlement condition, especially a site of this significance. First thing I did was I cut out a very, very thick, dog-hair thick stand of red pines, a plantation that was there, which ecologically has no value whatsoever. There's a few chipping sparrows that can nest in those things, but otherwise they're biological deserts. Okay, so this is just the process we had to go through in preparing the site for this coming spring, when we're going to plant it to prairie grasses and flowers, just like it was when the Muirs arrived. And instead of having to grub all the old stumps out like the pioneers did, it must have been just hellacious, back-breaking work. Rather, I hired a commercial applicator then with a stump puller. This is one of only 6 of these in the country. And he used this then to pull out the stumps. This is what the site looked like after he ran the stump puller through just one time, the first time. It just turns the stumps over, it uproots them. Then he comes in with a bulldozer and pushes them into piles and burns them. And this is just some of the pulp that came off the site. I didn't quite break even, by the way, on how much it cost me to have the site cleared and prepared, I went $200 in the hole to getting it ready for the prairie planting. So I certainly didn't make any money off it. And this is what it looks like when the stumps are burning. And this is it then after things were pretty well cleaned up. I might add Dan Ratazik came over and tilled the site, fine-tilled it. The man I had just kind of heavy disked it. It's more of an industrial disking, and then Dan came over and did the fine-tilling. This is a bench that looks out over that famous meadow that we started out with. When I bought the property, this is what it looked like. It was just a thick wall of mostly silver maple and aspen. So I wanted to restore that historic view that the Muirs had. So we started cutting that too. And this is sort of what it looks like now. It's pretty much the view that the Muirs had from the farmyard. Now I'm just going to run through some landscape components, some elements of the farm that were part of John Muir's whole experience here in Marquette County, and the real reason why he went on to become the father of our national parks. Turk's cap lily, red foxes, turtles, all these things as a boy, to a curious boy full of wonder, Scottish boy. All these things were teaching him everlasting lessons and understanding, a sensitivity towards nature that's very, very rare. Emerging monarch, kestrel, hummingbird on a cardinal flower. That's the cardinal flower. Prairie chickens. Now, part of my professional background is also in wildlife ecology. I'm very, very interested in restoring prairie chickens to different places in Marquette County. I've looked at the county, I've studied it a long time. There's areas now where we could start reintroducing the prairie chicken, start building up little population pockets. I think it's an idea that's time has come. That's one of the things I'm going to experiment with in the areas around me. Sulfur butterfly on butterfly weed, one of the milkweeds. Bobwhite quail, some of you see those on your farm still. Shooting star. Lady slipper orchid. Bluebirds. Asp flower, that's the first prairie flower to bloom in the spring. It oftentimes comes right through the snow. These are Sarah's lilacs with the eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly on them. Sandhill crane chick. Okay, when John Muir, some of the lessons he learned, practical lessons from the farm, when he longed to learn how to swim, his father said, go down to the lake and watch the frogs. So Muir went down to the lake and watched the frogs, and he learned how to swim among the lily pads and rushes. And all his life he was an excellent swimmer, and he learned right in that lake. And the cranes, actually now between late March and through October at least, I use the cranes as an alarm clock. I put the digital away, and these things start at 5:30 or 6 just below the house, and it works fine. Now, the restoration I've got going, I've been working with the Arboretum. This shows a small child collecting prairie seeds. This is Indian grass seed that we see along the roadsides in Marquette County. That's where it starts. We need seed, lots of it. This is what it looks like. This is the International Crane Foundation prairie that I worked on. I had an 8-month project there. And just take grocery bags full of seed and go out and hand scatter them. I think there's something very beautiful about the human hand restoring the earth, scattering seeds out and actually giving the earth a chance again to bounce back. Fire is a very, very important tool, stewardship tool, in the maintenance of open spaces like prairies. The reason for that is if you don't burn them at regular intervals, the woody invaders, shrubs, trees, and so on. In this country, black locust is really bad. Start moving in and shading out the sun-loving prairie plants. So fire is going to have to be a very important management tool. And if done right, it's very safe. This is what the prairie then will look like in time, the restoration that I've got going. This is what we're shooting for, shooting stars. This is John Muir when he was, about the time he left Marquette County to go to Madison to the university. This is a study desk that he made. It still sits in the lobby of the State Historical Society today. And that's all been carved out of Marquette County shagbark hickory. This is Syl Adrian and a small boy looking out over the lake. And Margaret Adrian, Syl's widow, has been just absolutely wonderful to me on this whole study. I couldn't have done it without her. She supplied me, excuse me, with a lot of correspondence that Syl left behind and copies of things. And Syl's dream, too, was to have this thing become recognized at a national level. And I think now with the 150th anniversary of Muir next spring, and the Park Service being very willing, we've got that chance. We've got some problems at the park. I think I'm a former park superintendent of a large park that's over 3,000 acres. And when I first saw the park, it looked so typical of so many parks that the local economy just doesn't support, doesn't have the funds to keep the park in the kind of repair and the state that it ought to be kept in. You know, I'm very sympathetic to the plight of Marquette County in terms of not having enough money to be, you know, to have a lot of patrol cars out there, to maintain a park like this the way it ought to be maintained, to make the necessary improvements. None of you should be red-faced for that. I mean, it's typical all throughout rural Wisconsin and rural America. But I think this is an opportunity that we have for bettering this place. So we see stuff like this. No camping or driving on ridge. This is common. I've been living there now all year. And I voluntarily every week go over and fill at least 3 trash bags. Beer cans, whiskey bottles, you name it. Everything you can think of. And this is more of the same. This is common. This is not I could take these at least every week. To an ecologist, these are very fragile, sandy soils. And to the man, John Muir, this shows just no respect. Today, this is the only National Historic Site we have to John Muir. It's in Martinez, California, about 30 miles from San Francisco. It's not a Muir-built environment in the vernacular sense. That means the Muirs did not create this place. John Muir married Louise Strenzel, the daughter of a wealthy Polish immigrant physician, when he was 42 years old. This is a product of his marriage to Louise Strenzel. He didn't as much as replace a doorknob himself. Yet we call it our National Historic Site. It's my argument that both of the homes, both farms, Fountain Lake Farm and Hickory Hill Farm in Marquette County, both of them, separately and together, were more important to John Muir in terms of forming the man, the naturalist, the great father of the national parks, than this place was. This is a shot of Muir on the right with his wife and 2 daughters, taken at Martinez, California, in about 1903. Now, his wife looks ill there, and she was. She didn't live much longer after this picture was taken. And another shot of Muir, taken a couple years before his death. Died on Christmas Eve, 1914. It's interesting, the last passenger pigeon died in the Cincinnati Zoo just a couple months before that. Has everybody read that? Tell me if there's someone who isn't done. Okay. It continues now. That says, and when I was about to wander away on my something, maybe wild rambles, we'll say, I was sorry to leave that precious meadow unprotected. Therefore I said to my brother-in-law, who by then owned it, sell me the 40 acres of lake meadow and keep it fenced, and never allow cattle or hogs to break into it, and I will gladly pay you whatever you say. I want to keep it untrampled for the sake of its ferns and flowers, and even if I should never see it again, the beauty of its lilies and orchids is so pressed into my mind, I shall always enjoy looking back at them in imagination, even across seas and continents, and perhaps after I am dead. So we have to remember that before Muir went out to California and Alaska and started climbing the highest peaks in this country, he started with this one right here, Observatory Hill. That was the first mountain he climbed. So we have to remember that before he became what's known as John of the Mountains, he was really John of the Simple Sand Meadow. And the most important lesson that Fountain Lake Farm taught him was like this spider web. Everything in nature is hitched to everything else. It's all connected. There's nothing separate. Thank you.
Okay?
Or the EDA grant.
The thing I want to make real clear is that the National Park Service is not the Fish and Wildlife Service. Some of you have had personal experiences, some of them bad, with the Fish and Wildlife Service over the refuge that is just west of County F. Let's not try to bring that into this issue. They're two separate governmental entities. And believe me, in studying what happened in Marquette County with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and especially 1979, and their political maneuvers that they used, and also, I feel the way that they're managing that property today, I'm on your side. I'm in total disagreement with it. In terms of how they went about getting their foot over in the door over there, and then what their present day management plan is. And I've got lots of things in the fire right now, but I do intend to have a meeting with Dick Berger, who I know well, who's the Horicon work unit manager, and also Dottie Thompson. That's on the agenda. But I know there's been some local confusion as to more federal land in the area. Now, there's two ways that the National Park Service would be interested in the site. One is complete transfer of deed to the National Park Service, and then calling it, deeming it, designating it a National Historic Site. They're scattered all over the country. We've got hundreds of them, literally. The Park Service, if that were to happen, would have complete control over the site. They would have their standard historic site regulations enforced, which would not hurt anybody that wants to use the park in the proper manner. What all these park regulations are intended to do is to allow decent people to go there and quietly fish, picnic, play ball, or whatever they want to do. And the regulations are intended to keep out the kind of, for the lack of a better term, riffraff that oftentimes, it's been my observation at least, the last few years, come into Muir Park and literally take it over and scare the death out of old people that are trying to use the park. Now, that's one option, go for National Historic Site status. The second option is something that's fairly new to the Park Service, and it's called a National Park Service affiliated area. Now, what happens in those cases is that whoever owns the park right now, which in this case is Marquette County, would maintain ownership. There would be no transfer of ownership involved. But the Park Service would set up a working budget with the county. In other words, they would supply funds for the county to draw from to pay for such things as mowing the grass, developing a proper parking area, eliminating those roads that are not necessary, putting up better, more official signs, replacing those, the grills are literally all gone now. If you need new picnic tables, they supply those. They'll give the sheriff's department X number of dollars for increased patrol of specifically the park area. So basically what they do is they sit back, they offer their expertise, but they don't own the park. Yet it's affiliated with the National Park Service, and they do put up their official signage. Okay? And they do also draft a stewardship plan, so the county doesn't have to decide then where roads ought to be, where parking areas ought to be, where ingress, egress points ought to be and shouldn't be, and so on and so forth. The feds take care of that, and believe me, their landscape architects are very good. I mean, they do wonders. That's the other option then, is if, the issue here is whether Marquette County wants to maintain ownership of the place, and with that then, some more responsibility than if it were, deeded to the feds, or if we want to just go National Historic Site and let the National Park Service worry about it completely. Those are the two options.
Three options?
The third is...
Not to do anything at all?
The third, that's right. There is three options. The third is not to do anything at all. That's right. Exactly. Any comments on this?
Okay, open for questions.
How many acres are we talking about?
We're talking about everything that's presently owned by Marquette County, which totals about 165. Now, that breaks down to 30, which is the lake surface. Okay. 70 acres approximately is now designated to the DNR as a state scientific area. That includes the meadow that I was showing pictures of, where he conceived the idea of the national park system. That's just below my house. It also it includes a fen, that type of a wetland, that's on the side which joins with Joel Burbach and the Ratazics. It's near where they extracted marl down there years ago. But we're talking about 165 acres, pretty much, plus the 17.11 that I own, which I intend to give a first option of purchase to the National Park Service anyway. I never want to see that site exchange hands privately again. I came across it, it happened that these people asked me if I was interested in buying it. It was never listed with a realtor or anything, and I had maintained a relationship with them. When I started the research 3 years ago, it was necessary to make contact with the people in Racine to get permission to go onto the site and start working. And that's how I came to know the Shooks and purchased the property a year ago.
I would like this group to know that when we had our fight before, there were 3 phases. And I hate the word federal. Because no matter what organization they belong to, they're going to get a foothold. We've won our fight so far. The next phase was from F over to 22, which means it's going to take all of these, many of these farms that are here now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're new in the area. You don't mind losing your farm. We have been here since 1848, and
Okay.
I don't want to lose the
Mhm.
farm.
Now,
We
who's...
were sold out by one person in our area. He owns land in this area. The third phase is south of 40.
Mhm.
And this other gentleman still owns land there.
Mhm.
And that government is not going to be satisfied with 165 acres.
Mhm. You're talking again about the refuge lands, aren't you?
I don't care, it's
Yeah.
federal.
There's a
And
real...
if they get a
Okay.
foothold, they're going to be there.
I can really appreciate your sentiments, honest I can.
doubt it.
I've also got, I think I can. My family also goes back in this state to the 1840s. And the pioneer homestead that my ancestors farmed, also to the north in the Sand Counties, is very, very dear to my heart. And I would hate to see something happen to it that I wasn't in agreement with.
But if
I
you get
do-
a hold in there, that's what's going to happen.
Okay, you have to trust me, I guess, on this one. We're going to have
can't
to,
do that.
we're going to have to,
Okay.
we're going to,
Okay, just a minute, we're not, I guess what I want to state here is that we're not here to take sides here and make an
Right.
issue. We're here for information tonight. You can take sides later.
right. No, that's fine, and I can appreciate what she's saying, believe it. I just have got to All I can do is tell you that there's a world of difference between how the National Park Service operates in terms of their National Historic Sites or their affiliated areas and the way the Fish and Wildlife Service was operating in 1979. Now, the way the Fish and Wildlife Service was operating in the late 70s under Jimmy Carter is a lot different than how they're operating today.
They can change anytime they feel.
They can change, they're politically dependent, absolutely. But I also, okay,
Once it's federal, they can turn it over to Fish and Wildlife Service.
No, they can't.
Why
No, they
couldn't
can't. There's Congress, there's...
They could condemn our farm without us knowing.
They don't use the right of condemnation anymore. In fact, the case went to the Supreme Court in the Smoky Mountains in Appalachia after this took place. They haven't used it since. I don't think you're going to see the Parks or the feds at all, any bureaucracy use it.
told this year by Fish and Wildlife Service, they want and they are going to expand what they already own.
I had meetings...
Right from Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, all I can go by, and you may be more up on this than I am, I had a meeting in Madison that was full of Twin Cities, Minnesota officials of the Fish and Wildlife Service in Gordon McCrary's office just a couple months ago. And this thing is dead as far as they're concerned. There's absolutely no funds appropriated, and there's nothing down the road. As much as they'd like to see it.
They want to make it bigger.
Listen, I'll say this. This much I know. They'll never again use the right of condemnation to secure those lands.
They
That
don't
I know.
have to. All they got to do is keep expanding,
If
raising more deer,
lands,
raising, more wildlife.
Okay, if
prairie
lands-
chickens or whatever.
if lands
Drive
become,
yourself.
okay, if farms go on the market for sale, listed with a realtor by the owner, anyone can come in and has the right to buy those lands.
Sure they do.
So-
They can force us.
No, they
Just
won't.
like they are with the deer situation.
Okay, now, you see, I share a lot of your opinions in terms of too many deer and some of their management decisions. Believe that.
Well, the more federal land we have, the less we have on the tax roll. The local people have to make up more.
Well, okay, what I'm saying that in the park, though, having the National Park Service involved with the park would benefit Marquette County financially, economically, rather than, freeze up these lands like you're talking about. Now, you did mention that you used the word that they could force you to give up farms. That's exactly what I'm saying. I know that they will not use the right of condemnation ever again. It's just not going to happen.
They don't have to.
They have to. That's the
Look at
only way that they
Horicon
can
with the
force you.
geese. They told me last year Horicon was trying to get the goose population moved this way because they've got too much trouble over there. Well, they drove those poor farmers almost crazy with geese.
That's state and
If
federal.
they get enough federal land in this area, they can do the same thing to us.
Okay,
It's not condemnation.
I guess what I'm trying to do here is draw the difference or make a wall between that mess that you're talking about with the Fish and Wildlife Service and this little 160 or 65 acres we're talking about that we want to become a National Historic Site. The two have nothing to do with each other. And there's no chance that if the National Park Service comes in and designates this thing as a National Historic Site or an affiliated area for that matter, that it will ever go into the hands of the Fish and Wildlife Service. In fact, it's just not the kind of property they'd be interested in.
It looks to me like it would be prime property.
No, it's not.
Is your property, Eric, is that all one unit then? Would that all join land?
That would all join land, Kelly.
Is there any other land there that would be height for additional acreage?
The only piece that they've shown any interest in at all that's in private hands right now is mine. That's it. And the only reason for that is that the Muir buildings were on my land.
How about the rest of the land that had on his...
They're not interested in that, Bessie. I know what you're talking about. Lands even that you own now. No, they're not interested in that.
And then you mentioned the DNR had a study or something around the lake. What was that? I don't have the DNR any more than I do the
That was a management.
It was. I'm not up on... Tom, maybe you can speak to that.
A few years ago, DNR representatives were interested in managing that south area, they call it a fin.
That's right.
Okay. And the Rural Planning Committee said that as far as they were concerned, if they wanted to go in and plant some native grasses, native wildflower deals that are supposedly native to that particular area, they could be free to do that. And whether they have really done much in there or not, I don't know. So they have actually had that
Yeah.
wetland area, I don't know how many acres are really involved.
All they're doing there, Bessie, when they have, okay, that the state scientific area portion of the park was designated in 1972, I believe. And DNR's dragged their heels. They acquired the land, or they didn't really acquire it. It's still Marquette County's, but they did need a resolution from Marquette County before they
to
manage it. And they really haven't managed it. They haven't managed it in 15 years. It's just now because of I've been pushing, and I drafted a stewardship plan and sent it to them and said, look, if you're going to manage this area, then do it. And so they're out there looking at what they have to do to restore it back to this pre-settlement condition. And that's what they were out there for. All the state scientific areas need periodic burning, brushing, whatever, to keep them the way they're trying to keep them.
Have they got an eye on property that they're trying to get to? We have too much DNR property in this area.
Okay, now you're asking whether they want to buy more in the area, or?
Is the DNR wanting to take over more land? Or is it just the end of this?
Okay.
Or do they have a foothold?
I have asked, and I've had lots of meetings with DNR people, being an ex-one myself, and permanently ex, I have no longing to go back. At any rate, they have no plans to secure any more DNR state lands within the vicinity of the area we're talking about, either the Fox River, the Upper Fox River Wildlife Refuge, the Fed land, or the Muir Park area.
How many years was John Muir in this area?
Okay, they came in the spring of 1849. He lived here between the two farms pretty much full-time until about 1865 or 6. And then he headed out for, his 1,000-mile walk, California and so on. All his life, though, he came back and paid visits to the area. He visited Jesse Duncan's father, William Duncan. He visited many, many people in Portage. His mother died there in 1896. He had a sister, Annie, a twin there's Mary and Annie that were twins that died in Portage in 1903 or 4. He regularly, though, came back. He had many friends in Portage and in the area. And he'd spend lots and lots of time talking around the farm kitchen tables to Marquette County farmers all his life.
In 1856, I believe, I believe it's 1856, that John Ennis had the deed to the property.
No, in 1856, the Muirs moved over, actually 1857, the Muirs moved over to Hickory Hill, and Sarah Muir had married David Galloway, and they began farming the Fountain Lake Farm. The Ennises didn't come in there until sometime after that, because the Galloways were on the farm for at least 10 years before they moved over to what was known as Mountain Hill Farm.
I shouldn't have looked that up.
Yeah.
I have the record of that.
Okay. Yeah, I do too. I've just been looking over it this afternoon, so.
I know you'd like to maintain this as informational, but there was a large tract of birch and pine in Alaska that was controlled by the Park Service that was never supposed to be timber removed. And now the federal government is paying the Japanese and another contractor a matter of something like $500 million a year to literally rape the forest and destroy the timber market in the United States. So that goes to show how...
You bet it does.
Where there's federal money involved,
Yep.
those stipulations can change.
You bet. And I'm completely aware of that case you're talking about. And we were talking about the Fish and Wildlife Service's refuge that this gentleman's had a lot of personal experience with. I was looking through all the sales hype that they used when they were trying to get monies appropriated from Congress to purchase these lands. And that was not a large purchase by federal standards. That was Mickey Mouse. But anyway, the argument was we need to preserve this Upper Fox River marsh area for the preservation of sandhill cranes. It's a prime nesting habitat for sandhills, which it is.
Marquette County, and I've worked for the International Crane Foundation, out of all the 72 counties in Wisconsin, every year Marquette County comes through number 1 with the number of sandhill cranes counted. And there's 3 or 4 counties here that it all join with us. It's all this South Central Sands District, like Waushara, Green Lake, Northern Columbia, parts of Adams, parts of Juneau, that always come through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right down the line. We've got a real concentration of cranes here. Now, which I think, of course, is great. I know that you've got farmers here that'll be happy to argue that on geese and deer and everything. But I say, who was here first, the cranes or us? And we've got to learn how to farm with nature. But let's not get into that tonight. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that when the feds went before Congress to get the money to use over here, to get it appropriated under in the last days of Jimmy Carter and all that last year anyway, they used this song and dance that it was going to be a strict refuge. It was going to be a preserve for sandhill cranes. And just like, selling out to Japanese timber interests in Alaska in this wilderness refuge, wilderness area, they really right now are starting to do the same thing to this area that we're talking about west on F by the Ratazics and you people. This is the first year that they've allowed more or less a free-for-all hunting system on those lands. And no doubt, each year now that's opened up, that can of worms is opened up, it's going to become less of a refuge and more of a public hunting area. You wait and see. That's the gradient that they follow. I'm personally upset about that. I'm going to be talking, as I said, to Dick Berger and to Dottie Thompson. And you're assigned to the site to the Park Service, and they're looked at as being very sacred places. And believe me, there would be no chance of that kind of development going on at a National Historic Site. It just wouldn't happen. In fact, we've got the laws on our side to protect that. I know, but there's a difference, though, in terms of statutory definition and so on between a wilderness reserve or a wilderness reservation, as they're known, and a National Historic Site.
But I still didn't make the point that I was starting out.
Okay.
This county board ought to be well aware of the trouble they can get into by accepting more federal funds all the time. Because they're scurrying around now looking for new ways to raise taxes from people that are already being taxed out of their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And the big share of the people that are living in this area aren't wage earners anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Retired people
Mm-hmm.
with fixed income. Higher
Okay.
taxes are not what they want.
I'd like to, if possible, move the question onto a little different area. I just want to summarize. I think every question and the biggest problem that I see being
I want the board
voiced.
to be aware of my feelings.
Right. I just want to summarize what you're concerned about taking federal money and then having strings attached. Just to summarize, I think every question has been pointed to the fear that if we go along with this, that this will mushroom into something much bigger and gobble up everybody and everything around it. Is that right? Is that
No,
basically?
just a little bit at a time, that's what.
No, but I mean, this is what,
And eventually, it's gonna be a big thing.
this is the fear that's being expressed here tonight.
Mhm.
I don't think it's a fear so much as trying to honor John Muir or preserve. It's a fear that once the federal buck comes in, the strings come, and the little deal suddenly becomes a multi-million-dollar deal, which is no longer content with 165 acres. It might just as well be 3,000 acres, or,
Right.
you know what I mean? This
Yeah,
type of a...
I do, Tom.
And this is what I
Well-
hear, and I think this has been questioned enough that I'd like to get onto some other subjects.
Let me just cap it up with as
But I
briefly
think
as I
that's,
can.
is that what I hear? That everybody's afraid that this thing is...
tax break on this, Michelle.
Pardon?
He gets a tax break on this.
No, I don't. I don't get any
Oh,
tax
yes.
break. No, I get
You're
none.
going to
Zero. Zero. This is all, every,
How come the green farms are getting it over there?
I don't know, but I'm not. I know that every last penny that has gone into that site, the 17.11 acres that I own, whether it be for tilling the land to get it,
No, but
or
after-
whatever,
Wait a minute.
has been
You're-
mine.
You're going ahead. You're saying that, what you're spending now, you won't get a tax break on, which is right.
I won't get a
Once you
tax.
join the society, the historic
No,
society,
no.
you get a tax break.
No, I don't. That's only on rental
And
properties.
any
Only on,
improvements you make on that
No.
property, you get an income tax.
only on income properties, sir. I've done this for years. I've done a couple of National Historic Districts already. Believe me, it only works on rental properties, income-generating properties, not a personal residence. Believe that. You can look it up.
You run around and make these historical societies?
I've worked a lot for the State Historical Society. I've just completed, within the last couple of years, the first National Historic District in Wisconsin that's in Dorr, Kewaunee, and Brown counties.
Do you buy property?
Oh, no, I don't buy them. No, no, no. These are all active farms that we have designated as National Historic Sites.
Move on to another.
Not always in Wisconsin, working all over.
Okay,
I'd like to ask you, can you explain why, when the Buffalo Brownies 4-H Club was at the park, and you came over there and literally chewed them out from one end to the other, and I wasn't there at that point. We left already. What was your reasoning behind it?
Well, I think I'm going to let that one, I was expecting that one tonight, and I guess I've done all I'm going to on that. I'm not going to give any further apologies for telling people to...
3 months to do that.
I'm going to, I have already written a letter, I've put something in the paper. Are you Bunny Paul?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I've phoned people on that, and they refuse to return my calls, and I have made an apology for being a little gruff on that. My own family's been active in 4-H for many generations. I support 4-H completely, and I would say that 4-H would do nothing but benefit from this thing in terms of their outings and their usage. I would say that I
Why did you do that in the first place?
because I have a heartfelt investment in the place. I have been a scholar of Muir's now for 20 years plus, since I was a kid. And I get darn sick and tired, basically, of the lack of respect that's shown for that place.
Oh, you're
It's a
trying
very,
to say
very
that the
special
Buffalo
place.
Brownies were very disrespectful.
No.
to the
I have
park.
apologized for that, and if it helps you, I will apologize before the whole forum tonight. I did, I acted, I shouldn't have chewed them out the way I did, and I'm sorry.
Why
Okay,
you take your own garbage down there?
okay,
next.
okay, let's, okay.
That park was not part of John Muir's home.
It was never a parts of it were, Bessie. Now, the county owns, everything that's on that east side, right down to the lake, the whole, shoreline, was a part of the original Home 80 Muir Fountain Lake Farm. There's parts of the park, though, that were never owned by the Muirs. That's absolutely true. But it's so fortunate that people like Sil Adrian and others had the kind of foresight when they did, to get the land completely around the lake, because that's totally preserved that lake, and it's one of the cleanest lakes in this part of the state. If that wouldn't have happened, I'll just bet you that we'd have mobile homes right to the shoreline. We'd have all kinds of ticky-tacky development, all kinds of riffraff. That was the best thing that ever could have happened when that whole periphery of that lake was preserved.
It's already being preserved, why give it away now?
Because
I was going to say, why don't you leave good enough? I've been
Because-
there for 73 years. I trapped every inch of that, and I've been shown different times, different ones of the older people that have said Muir's homestead wasn't where that basement is, that was a stable for a barn. His homestead was further on a different piece of property there. And, well, there's talking point is that in this one place, there's lilacs and everything grew there. Well, lilacs could grow almost any place. It don't have to be planted or anything
Right.
like that. We've got them growing all over our
That's
farm
right.
down there.
That's right.
But another thing that I am questioning is, they tell about the Sand Hill Crane Refuge. Well, I've talked to people that would be over 100 years old now, and back when they were living, like, well, say Ben Hull and them that you were speaking of, they said they never see a crane around in this area until the last few years, and I never did. I walked them marshes and I trapped
Yeah.
them and everything else, and my father would have been, well, right up near 100 years old now or better. And before he passed away, there was cranes coming here, and he said there was never any Sand Hill cranes at that time around here that he knew of. Well, where did they What happened to them? Where'd they come from?
They're, in all the early accounts, Howard, you know, they talk about the sandhill cranes. In fact, if you read the story of my boyhood and youth by Muir, sandhill cranes were very, very common around the Fountain Lake Farm when he was here. Now, there was a period, though, afterwards, after the big settlement, the immigration, where all kinds of wildlife, the passenger pigeon basically disappeared, buffaloes, prairie chickens, we can go on, and of course, the cranes were gone for a long time. In fact, in 1935, when Aldo Leopold did his game census of the north central states, he estimated that there was less than 7 or 8 nesting pairs of sandhill cranes in Wisconsin, period. So we're talking maybe about 20 birds in the whole state. We're now up to about 7,000 according to our latest counts. But see, that what was here before settlement is not, then we had this sandwich, this period where the stuff was gone, and now we're trying to restore it back because it has a right to be here. Now, as far as your comment goes, in terms of there's lilacs growing everywhere, and you heard stories about the house was somewhere else, believe me, I didn't just go on those kinds of things when I determined where the house was. I didn't just go on the fact that the lilacs were there, the fact that, that could have been a cellar depression for another type of a building. We had all these early sketches, and most of these are in California. The State Historical Society has some of them, but they're all labeled in Muir's hand as to exactly where he was when he sketched these things. And then all we have to do, and this is typical professional documentation techniques, you go out, you line up a surveyor's transit on fixed landscape objects, as I mentioned in the presentation, and those things haven't changed over time. Certainly a meander in the inlet to the lake hasn't changed. We line that stuff up, we can determine exactly where he would have had to have been when he sketched those things. And in a lot of cases, he even has indicated he was on the roof of the Baroque shanty when he sketched the meadow, say. Or he was looking out of his bedroom window when he sketched the lane with the lilacs. Anything else?
Okay. Okay, Ron.
I don't know if it's a national park or a national monument, but we were out west, Custer's last stand is, okay? Now, do you expect this thing to turn into something like that?
No.
Attraction,
No.
where people come and building and that type of thing?
No.
And I thought that was very degrading to the whole thing.
I agree with you.
But that's what is that, a national monument or a national park?
It is. It's Custer's National Monument. It's a battlefield monument, and that's located at Miles City. I know just where you are. I've been there many times, and I agree. It's getting way too touristy out there. Way too touristy. No, that's not. Now, the other thing is, see, remember, Marquette County's not powerless in this stuff. If the board decides to give a resolution, to National Historic Site status, we can specify in there what we want the Park Service to do and what we don't. I mean, you can add stipulations. You can say we don't want this thing to turn into, some kind of a Jellystone Park, which won't happen. The difference is that a National Historic Site represents something in our culture that happened there of a nationally significant nature. Whether it's associated with a famous person or whether it's associated with a famous event that happened, say like in Ripon, the birthplace of the Republican Party, for instance, something like that. And my argument is that Muir's significance, being the father of our national parks, he deserves national significance, not just county significance. And the present-day National Historic Site that we've got in Martinez, California, is not a Muir-built environment in the vernacular sense. It's not. Now, most of you have early ancestors in Marquette County. What I mean by a vernacularly built environment is what your ancestors built when they arrived here. When they settled here, they worked hard grubbing the land. They built these early houses of logs or early frame houses. The Muirs did the same thing here. They didn't do that in California, and yet California is our only National Historic Site. The only reason that's significant to the life of John Muir is because he happened to marry that woman that had it.
10 years from now, if the county were to go along with this affiliation situation, number 2, 10 years from now, what would you envision out there?
I don't think that, in terms of development, I would say no big visitor centers, no concession stands, no police state, meaning, spit and polish type rangers everywhere so you can't breathe. In fact, I would say that the site will become much more leaning towards a natural history area. It will emphasize an access point to the lake for fishing. It'll emphasize picnicking and 4-H outings, things of that nature, a ball game, whatever. It's not going to change in terms of, some big, high-scale, falutin park. The other thing that I've heard some local rumor on is that people think they'd have to pay to get in this place. Not true. Not true. A National Historic Site of this magnitude is a freebie. It doesn't cost anyone anything. You don't pay to get in. The Park Service would lose money by having some guy sitting in an office there. It's just not going to happen. The only thing Marquette County can stand to do by this whole plan is to benefit, because then the feds would come in, we could use their working budget to do what needs to be done. Wouldn't cost the county anything.
Okay?
How soon are you talking on something like that?
Well, Kelly, we need the resolution right away, because I've got 2 meetings scheduled in California, one in April, one in May. I've got another one in January in Omaha, Nebraska with the regional director of the Park Service. I've got to get a resolution if this thing is going to happen no later than January.
What kind of dollars are you talking for the operation?
That's something no, I don't. That's something that probably at the next meeting in Omaha, and I've already been talking with them before this, will have to be decided. It would not be a big working budget. It would be a lot more than what Marquette County spends on the park now, but it wouldn't be big. It wouldn't be very much. It would be, I don't know what you spend out there now. It's probably what, a few $1,000s maybe?
I can't really tell you.
Okay, I would say whatever Marquette County spends out there now is at $3,000. I would just a ballpark figure, if you're interested, maybe 10 times that much.
Out of pure respect for the people who donated that park to the county, I wonder if we should be tossing it over to someone else now. It was meant for the county. And it's given to the county by Council.
Right. Bessie, except that I also have a file on the history of the park, and I know that there's been attempts before this one to turn the park over at the state level and also at the federal level. And certainly make it a part of the Ice Age Reserve, which it now is, by Henry Royce and Adrian.
I know they want to take everything from F over to 22, and I'm not quite sure how far north.
Okay, now we're back on the Fish and Wildlife Service stuff again. Let's try to forget that.
I'm talking about the Ice Age Park.
Oh, yeah, that's basically a bike trail, runs all over the state, Bessie. It goes clear up into Door County, clear up into some of the northern tier counties.
Well, then why would they want to take our land from us on that?
They're not going to take it. No. The Ice Age Trail is nothing but a series of easements in most cases, other than where it goes. It's routed through state lands like, say, the Kettle Moraine, at Eagle, the southern unit of the Kettle Moraine State Forest. Otherwise, the feds aren't buying those lands. They're mapping this trail, and they're getting easements, just recreational easements.
Isn't there something on the drawing that was worked up by the Ice Age people that want to take the land and make it an Ice Age park?
No, they can designate it an Ice Age park, say similar to the Appalachian Trail that runs through the southeastern part of our country, through states like Tennessee and the Carolinas and on up to Maine. And they don't own those lands. People are actually living on a lot of those lands. They're farming. They've been in the family 200 years. Right. No. Again, I know this stuff is confusing, like bureaucracy always is. But let's not confuse. They're different entities. They're entirely different issues. They really are. See, at the state level now, we've been talking about the state DNR, but they have nothing to do really with the Department of Transportation or Health and Social Services, These are different governmental entities. They operate according to an entirely different statutory code or administrative code.
Okay, any other questions? I guess the thing I hear loud and clear is they don't want expansion, they don't want federal government to, blow this
Okay.
thing out of proportion.
I
That's
have-
what I hear loud and clear.
And I do too, and you don't have to believe this, or not, it's up to you, but I'm going to say it, and I'm completely sympathetic with you, sir, you, ma'am, believe it. I think, as much as you do, that the federal government should never have used their right of condemnation on these lands over here. They never should have done it. And now I'm sitting here trying to do something that I think is really a worthy project, and it can only stand to benefit Marquette County and you people, as users of the park, no matter if you fish or picnic or 4-H or whatever, can only stand to benefit. And I'm very happy that we got a good turnout tonight. I thank every one of you for coming, no matter what your feelings are. When the government uses an active condemnation like they did, they've done it all over the country, and especially the poor mountain people in Appalachia have been hit over the years with that. And they should throw that thing out and never use it again. And according to the meetings that I've attended, they plan to never use it again. Now all we need to do is actually see them take it off the books so that they never can use it again. They'll never have that right to do that again. Because people's heritage, the homestead, a lot of these places are homesteaded, by the government back in the 1840s, 50s, USA to whatever your ancestor was, whatever. Those lands are sacred too. They don't have the right, as far as I'm concerned, to come in and kick you off your home place. It's been in your family for 125 years plus, whatever. And so I'm in agreement with you. You don't have an argument with me there. But I'm also promising that this will not happen with a National Historic Site, because we're using that very same ammunition against them. Once they designated a National Historic Site, that's exactly what they're saying. It's culturally significant for its historic value. In a sense, it's the same thing you're arguing for your homestead.
Okay, so plan number one would be basically turning it over as a national, to become essentially in the Park Service. Plan number two would be an affiliation with the Park Service. It would be still with the Park Service, right? But just an affiliation.
It would be, Tom, the difference between the two. The major difference is that in option one, National Historic Site status, okay, we'll have National Historic Site status in either one. The difference is, one would be a complete National Historic Site, and it would be taken over by the feds. In other words, they would own it, you wouldn't worry about it ever again. The second one, the ownership would stay the same. Marquette County would hold the deed or the title to the lands. The feds, though, would agree to list it as an affiliated property. It would be called a National Historic Site. They would set up a working budget with the county. It would be under your administration then. They would offer expertise and so on. They'd give you advice, but how you spend that money would pretty much be up to you. I mean, they'd tell you, look, we think you need new signs, new grills, new tables, whatever. More patrol. Then you'd have to channel those funds into the appropriate areas. Okay?
How long a period of time do they have to last?
That's pretty much permanent, Kelly. That's a permanent status. Affiliated area is permanent. They both are.
Okay. Any other questions? Jeff?
Would the gentleman be willing to sell his property to Marquette County?
No, I wouldn't. No. To the National Park Service, yes.
It would be more of an asset than our 165 acres. You're 17 acres.
Right. As a professional park superintendent, I'm going to be very frank about this. I would never want to see my property as a part of that park the way it is right now.
I'd like to know why you heard all that, dumps and whatever. I saw that, and if you're concerned with ecology and everything, you wouldn't do that much burning. Also, you said you think burning should be every year or
Right.
whatever.
It's about every other or every third.
Every year. I think that's a lot of pollution to the environment.
No, actually, that's not true. Natural fires.
DNR does not like it.
Yes, they do. In fact,
I don't believe that.
they're doing more and more of it all the time. Natural fires like that were once a completely natural part of the cycle of nature. Now, due to lightning, Indians used to light the prairies, because they would help their game out, game populations out, whether it be buffalo or prairie chickens or whatever. That's not a polluting type of fire. If you're out there burning old farm fertilizer or chemical herbicide containers or fertilizer bags that contain anhydrous ammonia or nitrogen or whatever, or if you're out there burning old tires or something like that, petroleum offshoot, you bet that's pollution. But there's nothing wrong with a good forest fire, or there's nothing wrong with a good prairie fire. It's a completely natural phenomenon, and it oftentimes benefits.
All the animals that live on that can be burned.
A prairie fire only encourages nesting birds because the native species, the native species then have the advantage over these weedy exotic types. They thrive with fire. They need it.
Why does the DNR say we've got our prairie chickens back because we're not burning the marshes? And now you're burning it, you still want to have prairie chickens.
What, they say what?
We have our prairie chickens back
Mhm.
because the marshes are not being burnt the way they were.
Yeah.
You want to have prairie chickens, but you're still burning,
Right.
so you're going against.
No,
the
prairie chickens are fire dependent too. You have to prairie chickens are the most open space loving grouse that we have native to Wisconsin. Now, in natural plant succession, what happens if you don't burn is the shrubs start coming in. Then the sharp-tailed grouse moves in because they like a little shrubbier situation. They like a little prairie mixed with shrubs. Then if you don't burn, you keep letting the forest progress and the trees come in after the shrubs, then the next grouse comes in, and that's the ruffed grouse. And that likes woods.
What's the matter
You
with
see,
that?
so the prairie chicken likes open spaces. It evolved on the open prairies with the buffalo and so on. Very fire dependent. You do have prairie chickens?
Sure.
Okay, that's what I hope you do. That's wonderful news. That's wonderful news. I haven't seen one. I haven't seen one yet.
I even have these children.
I do know that some of you know who Aldo Leopold is. We just celebrated his 100th anniversary of his birth this year, the centennial year. He wrote letters. In fact, I've got one letter Leopold wrote. My father was a student of Leopold's, and an uncle of mine was a student of Leopold's. And at any rate, I've got a letter that Leopold wrote April 14th of 1948, trying to convince high people in the university, the head of the conservation department and so on, that Fountain Lake Farm should be purchased and preserved in honor of John Muir. He also talks about, we have to start burning again the prairie chickens that were once there are gone. He also did a lot of studies in Marquette County. He's got great field notes, and he was an expert ecologist. Now, Leopold died April 21st of 1948, just a week after this letter was written, and that also happens to be John Muir's birth. He died on Muir's birthday. There's a real nice back-to-back connection between Leopold, Muir, and Wisconsin, both of them being sons of Wisconsin, and it's time that we really recognize them.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions?
You told about all these other places going to heck, and why stopping this one? You haven't had anything we call but praise of the care that park has had and the looks of it in this county. You've never been condemned for having this park. Ever.
The only time we get static is when we try to do something out there to change it, and then everybody wants it left the way it was.
Well, then, it must be a good thing the way it is, right? John Muir never was born here. He never came back with any of his wealth. He never earned any money except from the federal government. Never paid taxes or anything else. We've got a lot of people that were born and raised in this country that left millions of dollars behind them. I don't see where John Muir is any important.
Okay, I don't,
Your statement, all I can say though is your statement is completely incorrect.
Where?
Completely incorrect.
Where?
John Muir left a lot of money to this country. He also left
Where?
us beautiful, millions of acres
Where
of
did he
wilderness
leave money to this
reservations.
country? Where's
He
my
worked
record?
hard all his life. He did pay a lot of taxes. He was a wealthy man. He paid a lot more taxes than you and I'll ever pay.
Where?
To the USA.
Any
Federal
report?
taxes or federal taxes?
I guess we don't need to get into arguments of what Mr. Muir did, for the taxes.
Well, he was not a shirker, believe me.
So I guess what we want to, is there anybody that really is opposed to anything that really honors John Muir? Anybody really opposed to that? Everybody's opposed to expansion of the park under federal control? Is that what?
That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. See, that's where it is.
The stipulations that come with the federal money.
There's always.
Are you opposed to to,
County
federal,
should be well aware of what the-
federal reimbursement at all, is it strictly within the bounds of the county park? You're opposed to any federal funds being applied to the park?
Yes.
I really don't think that'll happen, Tom, because once you get federal money, and we've had so many federal programs here, grants, and everything, you know what happens. There's so many strings attached to it, Tom,
They dump it back in your hands, and then you run around looking for more tax.
Okay.
Well, Tom, if you want to hear, I'd be happy to read some of the legal definitions and what's known as parameters of an affiliated area status.
Sure, read that. Then we'll,
Okay,
time's running out, we're gonna,
all right. By the way, there's, in our country right now, there's 33 areas that are National Park Service affiliated areas, designated as such. It says, this is just the discussion part, affiliated area status is becoming increasingly popular as a means of recognizing and aiding natural, recreational, and historical or commemorative properties outside the national park system. 19 of the 33 acres in this category achieved this status since 1977, all by congressional action. One reason for this growing popularity may be the absence of explicit criteria or standards for affiliated areas. From its inception, the National Park Service has made national significance the primary criterion for additions to the national park system. Over the years, it has published guidelines for evaluating national significance. These have been used by its professional staff, the Secretary of the Interior's Advisory Board, and Congress in weighing the merits of proposed parks. But the affiliated area category, which materialized by default to account for properties not fitting the legal definition of the system, has not been regulated in the same fashion. As a result, properties proposed for affiliated status have tended to receive less scrutiny. Now, that's when they're first acquiring the properties. It's much easier to get an affiliated area status than it is a National Historic Site status. If one assumes that any property receiving national recognition and/or direct federal assistance should possess national significance, then affiliated areas should be required to meet this requirement no less than units of the system. This is especially important given the tendency to use affiliated status as an initial entry to the system. The affiliated area concept has much to recommend it. Most nationally significant areas can be effectively administered by other parties, meaning the county, but some of the most outstanding deserve federal recognition beyond National Historic or National Landmark designation and help short of takeover by the National Park Service. Affiliated status for such places may be wholly warranted. To keep the category from becoming a vehicle for the relief of second-rate properties, which this one is not, I've been assured, however, it needs a firmer standing and standards. It needs to be defined in positive terms, perhaps by law, like the National Park System, and it needs express membership requirements beginning with national significance. That's how it reads.
okay. Okay. I don't know where we go from here. This will be referred to the Rural Planning Committee.